Our presentation is about The Godfather 2 by Gianna, Alyssa, Sadie, and Neil.
The Godfather Part 2 was released on December 20th, 1974. It's the sequel to the first movie, but also the prequel because it tells the story of Vito Corleone's uprising, as well as showing Michael Corleone's progression in the mafia. Some of the main actors include Al Pacino as Michael, Robert De Niro as young Vito, Diane Keaton as Kay, and Robert Duvall as Tom. The locations of the movie are New York City, Lake Tahoe, Miami, Las Vegas, Ellis Island, Corleone, Sicily, and Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic as Havana. The film won 6 Academy Awards, 3 Golden Globes, 3 BAFTA Awards, and 2 National Board of Review Awards. Some objects featured in the film include guns, revolvers back in Vito's time, and machine guns in Michael's, knives, suits, cars, cigarettes or cigars, and Vito's original clothing, as in his less expensive clothes. The context of the movie shows Michael leading his family in a similar way to how his father did. Michael is then betrayed and almost killed, leading him to seek out who went against him. The film also includes the pressures of those in Michael's organization trying to tell him how he should run things, and the pressures of law enforcement attempting to take him down. The film was produced by Francis Ford Coppola, who also directed it, and Gray Frederickson. It was produced by Paramount Pictures, and it cost $13 million to make. The author of the book The Godfather is Mario Puzo. Worldwide, the movie made $57 million and $47 million in the United States and Canada. It was one of the highest-grossing films in 1974.
The Godfather Part 2 is a highly acclaimed American crime drama film released in 1974 and directed by Francis Ford Coppola. The film primarily focuses on the life of Michael Corleone, played by Al Pacino, who has taken over the family business from his father, Vito, played in flashbacks by Robert De Niro. Michael is now the head of the powerful Corleone crime family. The narrative is divided into 2 distinct time periods: the late 1950s, where Michael struggles to maintain his power and expand the family's criminal empire, and the early 1900s, which depicts Vito's early life and his journey to becoming a powerful mafia figure. In the 1950s storyline, Michael faces various challenges as he tries to legitimize the Corleone family's business interests, primarily by expanding into legitimate enterprises such as gambling and politics. He relocates his operations to Nevada, where he establishes a strong presence in the casino industry in Las Vegas. However, he faces resistance from other crime families and must navigate treacherous alliances and betrayals. Meanwhile, in the early 1900s narrative, the film delves into Vito Corleone's origin story. It showcases his immigration from Sicily to the United States and his struggles as a young immigrant. Vito, originally named Vito Andolini, witnesses the murder of his family by a local mafia boss and narrowly escapes. He settles in New York City and gradually rises through the ranks of the criminal underworld, becoming a respected and feared figure known as Don Vito Corleone. Throughout the film, there are many thematic parallels and contrasts between the 2 narratives. Michael's storyline reveals the consequences of his ruthless pursuit of power as he becomes increasingly isolated and consumed by paranoia. He faces conflicts with his own family, including tensions with his wife Kay and his own brother Frito. Michael's actions have severe consequences, leading to betrayal and the eventual downfall of those closest to him.
Themes in The Godfather 2.
Next, we're going to move on and talk about some of the thematic elements present across the film. First, we have power and corruption and the interplay between the 2 of those. We have the cost of power, where Michael goes to great lengths to retain and expand the power of the Corleone family. And power within the families is shown as never being set in stone and always something vulnerable and susceptible to being lost. Therefore, this requires constant movement and shuffle and paranoia in order to retain and just hold on to the current power of the families. Next, we have corruption within the government. So money is shown as being king. Pat Geary is fully willing to entertain the bribes from the Corleone family after they implicate him in the murder of a woman in the brothel. So the senator from Nevada is used to illustrate the backroom deals and corruptions that lead to organized crime, such as the Corleone family going unchecked by the government. This is further highlighted during the Senate hearing, where Pat Geary openly stands up and shows his support for Italian Americans before excusing himself from the proceedings. I think Coppola introduced this and highlighted this to show the factors that allow this kind of organized crime to thrive in a society where you traditionally would think of us being hard on law and hard on enforcing these things. It illustrates how money is a corrupting force for anyone. And lastly, we have managing power within the family. So the film highlights the power struggle involved when the role of Don is passed from Vito to Michael. And although part 2 picks up some years later, the organizational struggle between the power in the Corleone family, the immediate family, and the larger mafia family is highlighted as well, with characters like Fredo demanding or expecting more power both within the mafia family and the immediate family and feeling unhappy when that doesn't happen. Next, we have the intersections between family and loyalty. So we have family loyalty versus family power. Michael's personal family life is in shambles while he's going to great lengths to expand and preserve his family's legacy. So it's a central theme in many of the movies we've seen, illustrating the similarities again between the organizational structure of the mafia and the family. But Godfather Part 2 highlights this explicitly. The Corleone family is strained, Michael and Kay are separated, he has his own brother killed, but throughout it all, he's doing everything he can to preserve and retain his family's legacy. It presents an interesting dichotomy and balance between loyalty to the immediate family and loyalty to the larger Corleone mafia legacy. The film also explores the differences between the two patriarchs from the same family. We're able to see parallels between Michael and Vito and their similar approaches to family priority and loyalty to fellow Italians. And then lastly, one of the most pinnacle moments of the contradictions between family and loyalty is Fredo's betrayal and subsequent killing. So the intersection of family and loyalty come to a head when it's revealed that Fredo has betrayed Michael and conspired against him with Roth and Gianniola. This leads to the ultimate tension between honoring your own blood and also seeking vengeance for someone who wronged you. Michael ends up retaliating against Fredo in the most ultimate way through having him killed, but this scene shows how family does not get a free pass and is subject to the same brutality as anyone else who wrongs the Don, especially Michael at that point. And then next, we move on to talking about violence and its consequences. So, of course, this is a central thematic element in almost every gangster film we have seen, from Scarface to Goodfellas and even further on into some of the Italian films we watched. But violence is mostly centrally used as a means of control. So it's the main tool used to maintain and exert power within their system of organized crime, and it's the knee-jerk reaction to someone acting out of the perceived line. Next, this film also highlights the cycle of violence. So Vito Corleone is witness to the traumatic and brutal murder of his family in Sicily, which leads to him then going back to Sicily to take that retaliatory murder of Don Ciccio years later. And then Michael and their family come from a legacy of violence. It started in Sicily, but it's furthered by their father, Vito. And then, of course, Michael ends up doing the same things. So there are some kind of nurture versus nature arguments there of what does this cycle of violence lead to, and was Michael inherently going to be this violent man because of his upbringing? And lastly, violence is a form of vengeance. So violence is preceded by an action deemed wrong by the opposing party. Michael and others in this organized crime, the system of the mafia, take an eye for an eye view of violence as a form of retaliation. If you wrong my family, I'm going to then wrong you or make it even by killing one of yours.
Given the film's paralleling storylines, immigration and the American dream are displayed through both Vito and Michael Corleone. Starting with Vito, in the film he arrives in America as a young boy, escaping the mafia in Sicily in the early 1900s. In a new country, he has to navigate language barriers, finding employment, and overall just adapting to a new and different culture. Though the success he obtains is through violent and illegal means, his rise in social status is reminiscent of the ideals of the American dream, that through hard work, any person may achieve economic mobility. There is a close-knit Italian-American community that provides him and other characters with a support system that allows them to navigate their new lives together. For Michael, this American dream is demonstrated in his move out west to Nevada as a form of manifest destiny. In the past, the West was symbolic of a place where people would go to forge new endeavors due to its being a blank slate of which things could be built. Michael's compound in Nevada is meant to expand the business's interest in Las Vegas casinos, which starts to go south after struggles with Hyman Roth, and the family he takes company with on the compound begin to leave him throughout the film. Michael embraced the American dream, serving in the military and trying to become more Americanized. We can especially see this in the film, as the identity of the Corleone family as proud Italians is not present in this film. We see that there is a version of the American dream that Michael will never be able to achieve, ironically because he has become so Americanized that it has led to the failure of his corporate ventures and also in his family. Throughout the film, Michael also undergoes personal and emotional alienation as a result of his waning morals. As Michael gains more power and gets further ingrained in the violence of the family business, a divide begins to grow between him and his loved ones. Obsessed with maintaining his position, his actions are driven by mistrust and a need to protect his own interests, emotionally and physically harming characters such as Kay and Fredo. Michael essentially chooses his work over his wife Kay's wishes for Michael to become legitimate, valuing his power as the Don over his marriage. Michael also ends up having Fredo killed in retaliation for his betrayal of the Corleone family. He goes further by suppressing his emotions toward those around him in an effort to discount his vulnerabilities. He becomes a ruthless and calculated leader who begins to equate emotion with weakness, continuing to isolate himself from those around him. Michael's actions go against the norms for the moral standards set by society, distancing himself from society as a whole as a result. His altered perception of priorities clouds his personal philosophy on life, setting him apart from others around him, such as his immediate family. Ultimately, it is the betrayal Michael is met with that leads him to question the loyalty of everyone around him. His isolation is self-imposed as a defense mechanism to protect himself and his corrupt empire. Through the film's double narrative, time and legacy are also explored. The two storylines depicted both Vito as he gains power in the early 1900s, while Michael struggles to maintain the legacy of that power in the 1950s. A connection is able to be drawn between the past and present, as the film acts as both a prequel and a sequel to the first film, giving insight to character motivations in the Corleone family's beginnings in America to the new era of the Corleone family with Michael as the Don. There is a generational shift in the film, as it is the lessons imparted by Vito that guide Michael's future actions in regard to the business and the family. This, however, causes Michael to be stuck in a cycle of violence and corruption. Given how intertwined corruption has become with the family itself, future occurrences in the film are reminiscent of past occurrences, as the Corleone family's prevailing mentality keeps them in an unbroken cycle with no clarification as to whether these patterns can be broken.
This timeline shows how The Godfather Part 2 fits in amongst the other movies in this genre. Vito's storyline occurs back in the early 1900s, and Michael's is set around 1958 to 1959. The Public Enemy and Little Caesar were both based around the Prohibition era in the 1930s. In the Name of the Law came out around 1949, Casino was set in 1973, and the most recent critically acclaimed mafia movie is Black Souls, which came out in 2014. The movie explores multiple areas of the mafia film genre. One aspect is the single individual storyline. The film showcases Michael's transition into power and the critical moves he makes in order to keep his family safe and his powerful status. The movie also talks about the organizational aspect with the betrayal. Michael is betrayed by his own brother and those outside of his organization. He has to go through various trials to find who threatened him and deal with them accordingly. Vito's origin story shows the creation of his own crime family after his original family was murdered. This details the struggles it took in order for him to amass such a power and control. Lastly, the movie shows the evolution of violence between the storylines. One hint of this is the evolution of revolvers to machine guns, making killing easier and more effective in the more recent storyline. The violence is just as gruesome between the two storylines, but the story shows how Vito's sensible and necessary killings have gone, and Michael has taken control with his unnecessary and brutal killings.
The Godfather Part 2 and Goodfellas are both iconic films in the crime genre, exploring the world of organized crime from different perspectives. While both films delve into similar themes, they differ in their approach, style, and narrative structure. As far as narrative structure, The Godfather Part 2 adopts a nonlinear structure, weaving the two parallel storylines set in different time periods. It combines the rise of Vito Corleone in the early 1900s with Michael Corleone's struggles in the late 1950s. In contrast, Goodfellas follows a linear narrative tracing the life of Henry Hill from his early involvement in organized crime to his downfall. The different narrative structure offers distinct storytelling experiences. As far as character portrayals, both films feature compelling performances, particularly by Robert De Niro, who plays young Vito Corleone in The Godfather Part 2 and portrays Jimmy Conway in Goodfellas. De Niro's portrayal of Vito Corleone earned him an Academy Award, showcasing the character's evolution from a determined immigrant to a formidable mafia leader. In Goodfellas, De Niro's portrayal of Jimmy Conway highlights the character's volatile nature and his impact on the protagonist's life. When talking about tone and atmosphere, The Godfather Part 2 maintains a more serious and somber tone throughout, emphasizing the familial and generational aspects of organized crime. It delves into themes of power, loyalty, and the corrupting influence of wealth. On the other hand, Goodfellas possesses a faster pace, dark humor, and a more frenetic atmosphere, reflecting the volatile and chaotic nature of the life in the mob. As far as directional styles, Francis Coppola, the director of Godfather Part 2, employs a deliberate and measured directorial style, emphasizing long takes and atmospheric visuals. Martin Scorsese, the director of Goodfellas, employs dynamic camera work, quick cuts, and a kinetic editing style, creating an immersive and an energetic experience. When talking about the socio-political context, both films explore organized crime. They present different perspectives on the socio-political landscape. The Godfather Part 2 reflects on the Corleone family's attempt to adapt and legitimize their criminal empire amidst changing times, including engaging in politics and expanding into legal industries. In contrast, Goodfellas offers a grittier and more grounded portrayal, focusing on the day-to-day activities of gangsters and the volatility of their lives without as much emphasis on the broader political implications.
Critically analyzing film scenes. Throughout the entire film, the scenes that take place in the past return the audience to the warmer, more charismatic tone that embodies the first Godfather film. This particular scene was the last in this film and is slightly different from the other scenes that take place in the past because it is a flashback. The scene depicts the Corleone family waiting for Vito Corleone's arrival for dinner on his birthday. It features the return of some of the original characters from the first film, most of which were killed and were not in the second film. It adds to the scene's sense of nostalgia and serves to highlight the stark differences of where the characters were at the beginning of the first film and now at the end of the second film. There is juxtaposition of Michael here at the peak of his moral consciousness, as he has no desire to be involved in organized crime and pushes aside his family and the business for the sake of embracing his American identity and choosing to serve his country. Sonny remarks that your country ain't your blood, but what is ultimately Michael's downfall throughout both films is that even after he enters the family business and steps into the position as the new Don, his Americanization keeps the Corleone family from retaining its formal glory, despite how fruitful the family's endeavors have been. This scene shows everything that Michael has lost, as his pursuit of power cost him his personal relationships and has left him emotionally disconnected. Michael alienated himself when he did not want to become a part of the family and business. However, he is still alienated even when he becomes the head of both, because of how Americanized he has become. The significance of this scene being Michael having a flashback further reinforces the feeling of loss he is experiencing at the end of the film.
The scene I chose is the one where Hyman Roth explains Mo Green's death. He tells how he didn't ask who delivered the order for Green to be killed because it was just business. He makes this speech after Michael asks him who had Frank killed. The themes in this scene include betrayal and loyalty. Roth highlights the treacherous nature of the criminal world where trust can be easily broken and alliances can shift. Trust and deception. The speech serves as a reminder that trust can be a scarce commodity in the world of organized crime. Roth's character has been trying to earn Michael's trust the whole film, but Michael has been suspecting him for a while. Foreshadowing. Roth speaks about the importance of loyalty and trust in their line of work, while simultaneously plotting against Michael Corleone and his family. The irony lies in the fact that Roth is undermining the very principles he praises, indicating his hypocrisy that exists within the criminal underworld. Character development. Roth's calculated words and composed demeanor in delivering the speech show his strategic mindset and how he's a powerful figure in the organized crime world. And power. The scene highlights the ruthless nature of the criminal world, where those who become too ambitious or threaten the power balance can face severe consequences.
So for my scene analysis, I'm going to be delving into arguably one of the most iconic scenes in film history, which was Michael delivering the "I know it was you, Fredo" line. So in this scene, Michael confronts his older brother Fredo for his betrayal of conspiring against him with Hyman Roth. After Fredo accidentally reveals that he has met Johnny Ola after previously denying it twice, this kind of allows Michael to finally put the pieces together as to who it was who turned against him and led to that initial assassination attempt in the beginning of the film. This scene's remarkable for a number of reasons. I think especially so because of Al Pacino and John Cazale's acting in this scene. It's just impeccable. I'd say especially Al Pacino, his eyes, if you focus on the eyes alone, they are locked on Fredo the entire time he delivers the line, never breaking eye contact, a theme throughout the film. But he delivers this line in a manner that is so subdued, so calm, yet extremely sharp and cutting after grabbing his face and drawing him in close and kissing him before he reveals this truth and his own knowledge of what has happened. So it's commonplace to acknowledge that Michael kissing Fredo while saying "you broke my heart" is akin to a kiss of death. I mean, at this point, Fredo knows that him breaking Michael's heart is a heroic feat. To break the heart of someone who has such a cold and hard heart, he knows that something bad is coming, whether this is a retaliatory murder or whether it's just simply exile from the family. The utter shock and despair on John Cazale or Fredo's face is just palpable in this scene. It's also worth noting that at this point, Michael has likely already decided that Fredo must be killed as a form of retaliatory vengeance. So he draws him in close, delivers this cutting line, but he still is offering him that they have a flight out of this kind of chaotic moment in Cuba to Miami. But Fredo simply stumbles away from him, runs away, and refuses to kind of get on the flight with them. I also think this scene is notable because it's a turning point in Michael's character arc, as it cements his willingness to shed family blood and act in a ruthless manner, even to his own older brother. I think the understated nature of this scene, the way that it's kind of this chaotic background, that's not this big lead up, he doesn't take him into a private room, but rather he hugs him, kisses him, and then delivers this sharp line that is essentially his death sentence because of this knowledge that Michael now has. It just shows the power of the actors, the power that can be expressed through faces and emotions alone, rather than some big drawn-out scene. I find this scene incredibly powerful, and I think it's rightfully regarded as one of the most iconic scenes in film history.
Symbolic scene in The Godfather Part 2 is the climax of the film, where Michael Corleone sits alone in his Lake Tahoe compound during his son's first communion celebration. In this scene, Michael reflects on his actions and the consequences of the pursuit of power. As far as the setting, the scene takes place in the serene and isolated Lake Tahoe compound, symbolizing the isolation and detachment that Michael has experienced due to his ruthless pursuit of power. The compound represents the vast empire he has built, but also signifies the emptiness and loneliness that have accompanied his rise to the top. The joyful celebration of his son's first communion contrasts starkly with Michael's somber and reflective demeanor. It highlights the irony that amidst a moment of family and spiritual significance, Michael is detached and burdened by the weight of his criminal deeds. The contrast underscores the moral and emotional distance he has created between himself and his loved ones. While Michael is positioned in a solitary chair, set apart from the festivities, this symbolizes his isolation and burden of leadership. It reflects his separation from his family, both physically and emotionally. The empty chair next to him signifies the absence of his wife, Kay, who has distanced herself from him due to his immoral actions. The door closing scene. As the scene progresses, Michael watches his family and guests outside through a partially open door. When his wife, Kay, confronts him about ordering the murder of his brother, Fredo, the door slowly closes, shutting out the celebrations and symbolically representing the irreversible breakdown of his family and the closing of the door on any chance of redemption or reconciliation. The fall of Michael. This scene marks a pivotal moment in Michael's character arc as he realizes his ambition and destruction he has caused to his relationships and moral compass. Symbolizes his descent from a once promising heir to the Corleone family empire.
The title of the scholarly article that I read was "In the Name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Gun, The Godfather and Modernity," published in the Americana e-Journal of American Studies in Hungary and written by Samuel Pardini. So the quote that I decided to pull from this, and there's a plethora of those that I could have chose from, but I chose the invisible blackness of the Italian-American man allowed mainstream American culture to reassert its whiteness in the new modern context and in different fashions. The racialization of the Italian-American man as a gangster made it possible for white people of Northern European descent, facing the previously mentioned unprecedented social, cultural, and economic transformation, to re-articulate the fear of the male. So in this journal, Pardini writes to talk about how the cultural trajectory of the Italian-American gangster illustrates the interplay between the development of capitalism and whiteness to identify 20th century modernity. So there's an assertion that the gangster trope helps us gain a deeper understanding of the American racial mosaic and the 20th century role of modernity. It highlights the invisible blackness of Italian Americans, which allowed mainstream American culture to reassert its whiteness in different manners, and how the subjugation of the Italian American man through this gangster trope allowed the larger culture to replace the archetypal African American man with an Italian American gangster. So the connections between these notions is that The Godfather serves as the officiator between modernity and whiteness, with Puzo and Coppola viewing modernity as the true gangster. So, Pardini makes note the difference between Vito Corleone and other classic gangsters such as Tony Camonte, who we see in Scarface, with Vito being extremely calculating and rational in order to maintain control over a modernizing world, but eventually this modernity controls him, which we see in his unwillingness to enter the narcotics business. Pardini goes on to argue that in the sequel, time replaces space as the conceptual engine that drives the movie, and this switch is what turns the Godfather trope into a more convincing critique of modernity. Moreover, Pardini notes that the roles of Mediterranean motherhood and the ways in which modernity begins and end with the death of a Sicilian woman, Vito's mother, and how that kind of informs Vito's world experience and trajectory as a young male navigating this increasingly modern and capitalistic world. The journal continues and draws comparisons between the America that Vito was navigating as compared to the new, increasingly modern and capitalistic America that is present when Michael Corleone takes helm of the family. And by the end of the journal, it's made clear that Michael has adapted more to and become more white, and subsequently the incident American that he never wanted to be. So this journal is strong in providing an acknowledgement of the female role and the underscoring that this comparison of invisible blackness is not meant to take away from, equate, or marginalize the experience of slaves, but rather to inform an understanding of the implications of racial hierarchy and the movement of people from their home countries to American soil and kind of what that leaves us with. This piece can also be seen as an intended reference point to make sense of the connections between the role of modernity, identity, and the Godfather trilogy as a whole, and subsequently what that means for the Italian-American gangster trope. A noteworthy aspect of this journal is the critical focus on Pat Geary's butchering of the pronunciation of Vito Corleone's name as a form of anglicizing and as a connection to Vito Angelini losing his name in a previous scene because of the immigration officer at Ellis Island being unable to understand it. This scene is a precursor to the subsequent racial attack Michael faces from Pat Geary when discussing the permits and licenses for the expansion in Nevada. The sequence of events, I found this especially particular because it goes largely unnoticed when talking about the film, but is extrapolated on in great detail in Pardini's analysis. I also found that this article is especially strong in bridging the gaps between veiled meaning and tangible comparisons from an informed perspective. Coppola and Puzo layer these films with so much meaning that it requires a certain level of informed knowledge to truly make sense of them and grasp all that there is to offer, and this journal serves as an excellent companion to the trilogy as a whole. I struggled to identify any biases or drawbacks for the average reader. Unless they're unequivocally pro-capitalism and modernity, then of course it would challenge some of their perceptions.
I read the article The Pleasures of Disappointment, Sequels and The Godfather, Part 2, by Todd Berliner that serves to criticize The Godfather 2 through the lens of insinuating that the stereotype of sequels not living up to the original films is ultimately the reason for this film's great success. The quote that I chose says, "As with most sequels, Godfather 2 disappoints its audience, but it does so in a particularly extravagant way. The film's conspicuous refusal to satisfy paradoxically serves as a source of audience pleasure." Berliner notes that what is special about this particular film is that through its parallel structure, it diverges from the typical narrative structure and tone of the first film while maintaining the original's artistic standards.
The article I chose is written by Gene D. Phillips and Walter Mudge. They delve into the thought process behind continuing the Godfather films and why exactly there were 3 made. The article also goes into detail describing certain scenes that were imperative to the film and also made it so the Corleone legacy could be continued over multiple films.
The article I chose is by Anthony Ambrosio, entitled The Godfather 1 and 2 Patterns of Corruption. The author explores the gradual descent of Michael Corleone's character from a heroic figure to a ruthless killer. The article focuses on the parallels between the 2 films and how they exemplify the perpetuation of crime, the expansion of evil, and the deterioration of the criminal empire. The second half of the article delves into the contrasting approaches to power and influence between Michael and his father, Vito. Vito Corleone utilized his authority to aid those in need and strictly adhered to business-related decisions. In contrast, Michael's path into the mafia is marked by vengeful killings driven by passion rather than rational thought. This ultimately leads to his transformation into a cold-blooded killer rather than a strategic criminal mastermind. Ambrosio effectively communicates his findings and conclusions derived from his analysis of the films. The quote I chose from the article is, "By telling the tale of the Godfather and then essentially retelling it in order to show the deterioration in the second generation of Corleones, they masterfully make the same thing different and the same theme more far-reaching."
As a cinema major, I have watched and analyzed many films for my classes, but more often than not, the focus is on technical aspects of the films and cinematography rather than the overarching themes of a film and how it connects to society. This course has allowed me to be able to combine my knowledge of filmmaking and videography with a greater understanding of the symbolism and events in a film that further enhance its cinematic purpose. Films have a duty to the public to expose hidden truths and tell untold stories, and this course has allowed me to explore in depth the mafia genre and its impacts on viewers and society as a whole. Connecting this course to my journalism major, especially in some of the Italian films, the importance of investigative journalism and primary sources is prevalent. Journalists have a responsibility to report on politically, socially, and historically significant events. This importance has been stressed throughout the class, as it is through journalistic and cinematic work that topics such as this are able to be discussed.
Throughout my time at Elon, I've been working towards a business analytics degree. One of the classes I took was called Legal and Environmental Business. We learned how state and government law applies to various business practices across the board. This class was eye-opening in how it showed me the countless laws put in place in order to make the business world a fair place that doesn't just benefit a select few. Thinking about the cinema class as a whole reminded me of my legal class. I thought back to all of the requirements and restrictions in order to run a business legally and keep the profits fairly distributed. This concept has been evaded by the mafia for generations. The gangsters will go to whatever lengths necessary to get as much money as they can while disregarding all business laws we have in this country. In the legal class, we also learned the social responsibility of a business and how there's a certain level of responsibility a business has in order to help the people affected by it. As much as the mafia men look out for their family and those they keep close to them, one wrong move turns them against each other in a heartbeat. I didn't understand the reasons of why people would go against the clear and specific laws set up for the businesses in this country, but after reading and watching everything in this course, I definitely have a better understanding of the motivations to ignore them.
So, in terms of a personal connection and reflection between this course and my major, which is strategic communications, I think one of the most important things is illustrating the power of public relations. And contrary to a lot of modern popular belief, public relations isn't necessarily just hiring someone to advocate for you, but rather the people themselves who are part of this organization, kind of serving as a figurehead and a person who has a powerful influence over their perception. In so many of the films we watch, from A Bronx Tale to The Godfather Part 2, we see the influence in the community of these people. And many times people would say, I don't want this kind of brutal murderer being part of my community. But when they're able to switch their public relations, switch the face of their operation into it being seen as beneficial for the people in the neighborhood to have these forces around, kind of as an enforcer, as someone who's going to make sure that the actual law is treating them fairly, they're able to be perceived in such a different way, be seen as providing benefit to the community. And it's because that they pick and choose their battles, especially in, we see The Godfather Part 2, young Vito Corleone is willing to go out on a limb for his wife's friend and try and get her rent lowered, try and keep her from being evicted, because it's kind of a public relations step to be willing to do something that isn't necessarily beneficial for you at the time, but it's going to make you seem like someone who deserves to be heralded, deserves to be respected. I think throughout the films we saw just threads of people having to effectively manage their public relations, especially in times of crisis, in order to portray a personality that is positive to the community. So I think that's definitely something you can take away from this. I mean, for better or worse, ethical or not ethical, there's ways to kind of spin things and present yourself in a way that is going to rally the community behind you and get a sense of support, even if maybe it really shouldn't.
As far as my economics major, the film The Godfather Part 2 pertains to economics due to the concept of money laundering. I thought this was really interesting when we got to see how illegitimate forms of cash were cleaned through legal operations like gambling and politics. It was interesting to see this from the 1950s perspective, as money laundering has advanced so much until the present date. Using legitimate enterprises to launder money influences GDP, as that money was initially untraceable, but now is used for transactions all over the country to support other businesses.